Thank you everybody for joining the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum and Duane Vandenbusche for this evening's, I think we're at part 4 for History of the Crested Butte area. My name is Nell Burkett. I'm the curator at the Crested Butte Mountain Heritage Museum. The museum would like to recognize that we are guests here on this land, historically Ute territory. We acknowledge, tongue-tied tonight, we acknowledge that the Uncompahgre Ute and Tabawatch Ute were forcibly removed from this area due to the Brunel Treaty. We hope that you will take time to visit our neighbor, the Ute Museum, located in Montrose, Colorado, with exhibits developed in partnership with the Ute Tribes by History Colorado, our state historic society. While we could never do this history justice, we do include information about the Paleo Indians of the Gunnison Valley, the Ute people, and the Brunel Treaty, and the Los Pinos Indian Agency in our exhibits. We hope that you will consider becoming a member or making a donation to support this program and all the work that we do here at the museum. You can do so by visiting our website at crestedbuttemuseum.com or by giving us a call at 970-349-1880. We also have historic walking tours every Saturday at 2 p.m. with our very own historian, Glo Cunningham. We also offer private walking tours for 3 or more that can be scheduled at your convenience. This program is being recorded and will be available at crestedbuttemuseum.com and on our YouTube page. If you have questions about our programming, visit crestedbuttemuseum.com, find us on Facebook or Instagram, or you can also sign up for our newsletter. If you sign up for our newsletter, you'll always be the first in the know about all of our events and all of our programs. A huge thank you to our lead sponsor, Western Colorado University Alumni Relations, as well as Bluebird Realty and Bill Petros. We'll have time for questions at the end of the talk. Be sure to post them in the chat or in the Q&A, and so far we've been able to get to all of the questions. All right, with that, I'll hand it over to you, Duane.
Thank you, Nell, and welcome everybody. A little reminder, this is number 4 out of 12. We're going to finish off on April the 15th with our last one, always at 7. I also want to thank Kevin Sanderford as one of the sponsors. He's the guy who furnishes the book, and we're going to have a trivia question at the end of the talk tonight. And this is the book that I've done on the history of Crested Butte. I hope everybody can see it. And that'll be given out to whoever answers the question at the end of the presentation. We've got about 200 people on board and over 400 signed up. So really appreciate all you folks tuning in. On March the 4th, we are going to have a special program. With this coronavirus, we haven't had any polkas. Pete Dunda is going to be in his great polka band, but it'll just be Pete. And Pete and I are going to be at the museum with Nell, and Pete is going to talk about the history of the polka music in Crested Butte. And then we are going to get into some polka music with Pete on the accordion. And anybody who doesn't know how to do the polka, we're going to give a lesson or two. So we want everybody on March the 4th to be ready to go with their dancing shoes on, doing the great ethnic dance of the polka in Crested Butte. Next week, depending on how far we get, I want to talk about the ethnic people of Crested Butte, starting off with the Cousin Jacks and then going into the Southeast European people. Today, I want to start off with something that we left off with last time. We talked about the great silver camps of the Gunnison country and the Big Five, and there were a whole bunch of them in addition to those 5 that never really lasted very long. Crystal, Schofield, Pittsburgh, Obie Joyful, Hidalgo, Bellevue, and Elkton, all with great promise but never made it. And a lot of people have asked me through the years, you know, what were those mining camps like? What were the characteristics of the mining camps? So we're going to go through about 11 of them right now in order. These are the characteristics that existed in Gunnison Country mining camps. And the first one is that all those mining camps resembled an urban frontier. We're not talking about isolated settlements in the middle of Nebraska, maybe with farmers 10 miles away from each other. Anytime you put 2,000 and 3,000 and 4,000 people in one spot in the mountains, that has an urban or a city characteristic. Secondly, all of the mining camps of the Gunnison country lacked self-sufficiency. Everything had to be brought in. Initially, they could produce the wood and then they clear cut all the timber and that was gone. And initially they had some meat, but once they shot the hell out of the deer and the elk, that was gone also. So everything had to be brought in. It was very expensive to get it in by wagon early, and then of course railroad later. But remember, a lot of the mining camps didn't have railroads, so it had to be brought in by wagon train. Number three, all the mining camps in the Gunnison country had a speculative gambling instinct. The only thing that brought miners into a very difficult area was the chance to get rich. And they couldn't wait to get rich and then go back home. And they got the same mentality. I remember when I was a cross-country coach, we're going down to a meet in Santa Fe. We stop at Alamosa, and one of my athletes asked me, says, "Coach, why don't you buy one of those Colorado lottery tickets?" And I said, the chances of me hitting anything are 1,000,000 to 1. And my athlete put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Well, you know, Coach, you can't win if you don't play." And that's the view that the miners had. The odds might be against you, but if you're not there, you got no chance at all. Number four, intellectually and culturally, the mining camps of the Gunnison country were very cosmopolitan. People came literally from all over the world. You had every nationality, every different language, every section of the country and foreign countries, and they all mingled together. And that was great culture diffusion and great cosmopolitan civilization, which means that they were very high, a very high civilization in the mining camps. Number five, the extractive nature of the mining camp meant that it led a short existence. All mining camps in the Gunnison country and elsewhere were monuments to their own destruction, because the more they succeeded, the more they committed suicide. The more ore you took out of the ground, the less ore that was left in the ground. And when all of the ore was taken out of the ground, the mining camp died. Number six, the mining camps of the Gunnison country affected the area around it. When the mining camps died, the supply towns did not. And the supply towns in the Gunnison country were Crested Butte and Gunnison. And they did not have all their eggs in one basket. So when the ore ran out in these mining camps, they became ghost towns. But Gunnison and Crested Butte were supply towns, railroad towns, smelter towns. They did a lot more than just engage in mining. Number seven, the isolated and short existence of mining camps in the Gunnison country forced them to solve their problems quickly and pragmatically. There was no messing around. When miners came out of the mining areas or their mines and come into town on the weekend, they settled problems of claim jumping or murder very quickly. And if anybody got a little huffy and said, "Well, I'll appeal this," as soon as they used the word appeal, one guy would yell out, "Harry, get the rope." And the idea was, you're going out of town now, usually with tar and feathers, or we're going to hang you. What's it going to be? In Animas Forks above Silverton at 11,200 feet, the Animas Forks Pioneer newspaper said, "There'll be no appeals from any of the actions taken by minor courts out here because we are the highest court in the nation." Number eight, the mining frontier in the Gunnison country was greatly influenced by the federal government. The federal government owned the land that miners were trespassing on. They set the price of gold and silver high enough to where miners could make a living off of it. They built and subsidized railroads and wagon trails and stagecoach lines. They gave Indian protection, and they financed water projects. And the federal government was one of the best friends the miners ever had back in the old days. Number nine, the mining camps of the Gunnison country were very intolerant towards Mormons. They didn't like polygamy. Very intolerant towards Orientals. If Chinese were in a mining camp, they could work for practically nothing, and that was an indication the mining camp was going downhill. Very intolerant towards Indians. The only good Indian was a dead Indian. Get them off the land so we can mine. And then they were very intolerant towards Mexicans. And that obviously was racial, dating back to the Mexican War. Amazingly enough, there wasn't a lot of discrimination against Black people in the Gunnison country or the West. Number 10, failure was what all mining camps in the Gunnison country had in common. There is no stigma attached to failure because mining was a high-risk occupation. The old saying was that mining camps were meeting grounds for failures. And finally, in the Gunnison country mining camps, we did not have the high-grade ore like they did in the San Juan or up around Central City or Aspen or Creed. And as a result, the mining camps didn't last very long. By the year 1893, the silver towns of the Gunnison country were gone, never to return. And the causes were the following. Number one was a great struggle going on in the US called the Battle of the Standards. And the Battle of the Standards involved whether or not the United States was going to be on a bimetallic standard, silver or gold. And after 1873, the United States went off the silver standard and adopted gold. And that was the beginning of the end for the mining of silver. The second reason was the silver panic of 1893, when silver went down to 58 cents an ounce. And when it went down to that low, mining camps closed up, railroads stopped running, smelters shut down, and investors stopped coming in. It was over forever. Thirdly was weather. It was very difficult, and the seasons were very short during the year in the mountains. Number 4, I've already mentioned, and that is the Gunnison country did not have high-grade ore. And finally, many of the silver camps in the Gunnison country, like Gothic and White Pine and Tin Cup, never got a railroad. The early miners who came to the Gunnison country mining camps were called Cousin Jacks. And they were from some of the best mining area in the world, and that was Wales, where the miners really knew what they were doing. They were called Cousin Jacks because if somebody got hurt or killed in a mine, one of the Welsh miners would go up to the boss and say, "My cousin Jack can do that." And another man was on the way. Their wives were called Cousin Jennies. They spoke English. They were Protestant. We called them WASPs, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, the respectable people, in quotation marks. And then around the mid-1880s, we'll be talking about this next week, coming into Crested Butte were people from southeastern Europe. They came in from the old Austro-Hungarian Empire. Croatia, Italy, Austria, Slovakia, Slovenia, Albania. They were Catholic. They did not speak the English language. They were not the respectable people. They had strange sounding names. Krizmanich, Sedmak, Sporsic, Yaklich, Kapushin, Mahelic, Malensik. And they were considered beneath those WASPs that had come in before them. We've already talked about how Crested Butte got its name, with Ferdinand Hayden naming it in 1874, looking at it from Mount Teocalli. In 1875, a man named Dan Jennings came into where Crested Butte is today, and he was the first guy to find coal. The Hayden expedition before had really found it, so it's Hayden and Jennings, 1874 and 75. 3 years later, Dan Jennings sold out to one Howard Smith and another guy named Sant Robinson. And they found more coal, and they bought up land around Crested Butte. For a long time, Crested Butte was simply known as the gateway to the Elk Mountains, the jumping off point where you could get into the Elks where the great silver camps were opening up. However, because of coal, Howard Smith incorporated Crested Butte in the year 1880. And Nell's getting a little ahead of me. We'll hold off on those a little bit, Nell, but there's Crested Butte with the coke ovens and the railroad down below. And this is back in the 1890s. A pioneer wagon road was built from the Great Silver Camp of Irwin into Crested Butte in 1880. In the early 1880s, the Colorado Coal and Iron Company of Pueblo bought out Howard Smith and Robinson, and they built 50 coke ovens at the Jokerville mine, just to the west of town. The Denver and Rio Grande Railroad arrived in Crested Butte on November 21, 1881, and that made coal possible, the mining of coal possible, because now you could get it out. The Forest Queen began 1880, the Elk Mountain House 1881. So there was Crested Butte, almost 9,000 feet, beautiful Elk Mountains in the background, very beautiful area. And now in the 1880s, Crested Butte turned to its destiny, and its destiny was coal. We are now going to take a look at the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company Big Mine, which is the first mine, and it was one of the early mines in Crested Butte, but not the earliest, and certainly not the only one. The other great coal mines in and around Crested Butte had names like the Robinson, just east of town, the Buckley, just east of town, the Horace, just east of town. As you come in from Gunnison, you look on the left side of the road, you'll see black splotches. And that's where the coal came out of that area. Floresta, the great Anthocyte mine about 12 miles west of Crested Butte. The Jokerville, just to the west side of town, as we mentioned. The Peanut and the Pershing, where the lower loop is today, and the Gronk sits. Anthocyte, 4 miles up the Slate River. And of course, the Big Mine. Crested Butte during those coal mining days was heavily polluted. All of the timber had been clear cut, smog hung over the town, and occasionally the rivers were also contaminated. And there you get a good look at the building of the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company. They were in Pueblo. The Big Mine, located on the bench, 1894. That great mine was the third largest in Colorado, third largest coal mine in Colorado. It ran from 1894 to 1952. There were 7 miles of underground trackage and tunnels. It produced bituminous coal. Bituminous coal is soft coal. There's a great painting by William Henderson of the Tipple and the Big Mine in Crested Butte about in the 1890s. I love that shot. Reminds me of Ansel Adams' photographs. 400 men worked in the Big Mine. And I remember a great song by Tennessee Ernie Ford. And one of the lines went like this: 16 tons, and what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my toll to the company store. So here those miners are now working in the third largest coal mine in Colorado. And there you see a power plant, and you see the superintendent's house, and you see the mule barn in the background. And over on the left, you can't quite see Mount Emmons, but it's just over on the left side. 70 mules and burros worked inside the mine. Each one cost $200 each. the miners bitterly would say that it was better for the company if a man got killed than a mule or a burro, because a mule and a burro were worth more. All you had to do is bring another immigrant in off the boat if a guy got killed. Now there is the tipple of the big mine with Mount Emmons in the background. So coal came out of the mine into the tipple, and then you can see those coal cars down below, and it went from the tipple into the coal cars. The yearly payroll of the big mine, $400,000 a year. That's about $35,000 a month. The initial workers, cousin Jacks, but they've, except very early, did not work later in the coal mines. Most of the people who worked later after 1890 came from Southeastern Europe. Deaths in the mine were common because of falling rock. I estimate that in the 58 years it was open, 100 men died in the big mine. Miners in the 1890s made $3 a day. Those working by the ton made $5 to $6 a day. Fire in 1909 burned the engine house and several outside buildings, and the mine closed for 30 days. The same thing happened in 1921. There you get a good shot looking from the mine at Crested Butte in the wintertime, again in the late 1890s. The major vein, the major coal vein in the big mine was 5.5 feet to 24 feet thick. That's pretty impressive and a very rich coal mine. The workings extended south under a cover of rock, which was 2,000 feet thick. The roof of the mine was shale, overlain by massive sandstone. There is a picture of the company housing owned by the CF&I, and that's where a lot of the miners lived. A lot of these guys were single. And of course, Crested Butte was a company town. You shopped at the company store, you lived in the company housing, you played in the company playground, and you got paid off in script, which was able to be used to pay off your rent bill or to buy goods at the company store, but wasn't good anytime you got out of Crested Butte. The coal in the big mine was high grade. A lot of timbering was used. The method of mining was called room and pillar. Rooms were 24 feet wide and 400 feet long. Ventilation came from 2 exhaust fans, 11 feet 6 inches in diameter. Explosive gases were in places in the mine, and no matches were allowed. Safety lamps had to be used. These are lamps that did not use fire or any kind of matches. The coal inside the big mine was sheared by hand, with no dynamiting allowed because of the danger of explosions. 200 wooden mine cars of 3,000 pounds capacity each were used. From the pit mouth, the coal went by gravity incline to the tipple, and the tipple was located so that the coal could then be loaded into railroad cars or sent to the coke ovens. And there you got a good example of the 70 mules and burros. That's their barn, and these animals were used in the mine to pull the coal towards the tipple entrance. Strikes were common. In 1891, with Doc Shores, the sheriff of Gunnison, forced to come in. 1903 to 1904, when a man named George Bear of the Reading Railroad, this was a national strike, said that the Christian men of God have been shown by God to own the mines and not the riffraff working in the mines. In other words, whoever owned the mine were a little better breed of people than the people working in them. Another strike came in 1927. The strikes involved wages, hours per day, safety, but most of all, the number one issue was collective bargaining. Was the CF&I going to accept the United Mine Workers as the bargaining agent for the workers? For a long time, unions in the US were considered conspiracies. And not until the late 1930s and the start of World War II were they recognized as the bargaining agent for the workers. The CF&I Big Mine closed down in 1952. And it closed down for a variety of reasons. Gas and oil had come. More electricity had come. The CF&I Big Mine was far away from the markets. And weather, of course, was always a consideration. And now this takes us over to the coke ovens. The coke ovens were constructed in 1884 at the Jokerville mine. Now there's a real good shot. There is the tipple. You can see the railroad cars underneath. If you look on the left, you can see the 154 coke ovens of the big mine. And that white area going uphill behind the tipple, those are the famous 156 steps that took you from Crested Butte up to the bench where they had a school, and they also had some buildings where some of the workers who were prominent, like superintendents or pit bosses, lived. Later on, 154 coke ovens were built for the Colorado Fuel and Iron Company Big Mine. They were beehive ovens. And there you get a good look at them. Fire case brick, Denver Rio Grande narrow gauge train running alongside. The coal, the bituminous coal, was put in those 154 ovens and baked for 48 hours, red hot. That drove out some of the carbon dioxide or impurity in the bituminous coal. Then they were allowed to cool, and it was called slag. And then they were taken out by pitchforks and loaded up to the railroad cars and then taken up to the CF&I steel mills in Pueblo. 30 men worked at the ovens, and they turned out 1,000 tons of coking coal a week. That coal went to Pueblo. Now I'm going to interlude right here. The coking coal went to Pueblo. The limestone from the lime on the east side of Monarch Pass, owned by the CF&I, went to Pueblo and the steel mills. And then iron from near Trinidad. They all came together. And they were now put into something that Henry Bessemer of England invented in 1856, and that was called a blast furnace. Where I come from in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, I come from the iron country and the copper country. We got towns with names like Calumet and Bessemer and Iron Mountain and Ironwood and Iron River. And Henry Bessemer found out a way to convert iron into steel to power the United States Industrial Revolution, and Crested Butte was absolutely essential for it. A blast furnace means that you blast air into that iron, coking coal, and lime. And it's a little more complicated than I'm telling you, but that drove out more of the impurities and allowed you to convert iron into steel. The CF&I steel mill at Pueblo was the only steel mill west of the Mississippi River in the 1880s. So Crested Butte was absolutely essential in the success of the Industrial Revolution of the United States. There are three types of coal: bituminous or soft coal, that's the big mine; anthracite or hard coal, that was what Floresta was all about, and anthocyte 4 miles up the Slate River was all about, Smith Hill anthracite. And then, of course, you had the coking coal, which is bituminous coal heated red hot. Colorado Fuel and Iron Company owned Crested Butte lock, stock, and barrel. They controlled elections. They paid the miners in scrip. They had company housing, company store, company playground, and they took advantage of the immigrant people by cheating them by weighing the coal and accepting bribes. So it's a very tough situation for the people who worked very hard in those mines. And then the mine, as I told you, closed in 1952 after 58 years of operation. More about what happened a little later on. Crested Butte School had the only school paper in the state published and printed entirely by students. The original nickname of the athletic teams, Rangers, not the Titans that we have today. And a little sidelight. Anybody is interested, they got a great museum in Pueblo, and it's called the Bessemer Museum. And that is where the CF&I photographs and a lot of the information is. And it's tremendous. So if you ever have a chance and you want to find out a lot more about Crested Butte and any other properties the CF&I owned, you go to the Bessemer Museum in Pueblo. That takes care of the big mine. Now we're going to go back a little earlier and talk about the Great Jokerville, which, as I said, is located just to the west of Crested Butte as you're going out of town. It is a bituminous coal mine connected to coke ovens, 50 of them, by railroad track. The first coking had been done in pits, but by 1884, 50 coke ovens of fire brick encased with stone had been built. By 1884, 30 men were employed by the Colorado Coal and Iron Company at the ovens. 120 men were working in the Jokerville. 24 hours a day, the work went on with 3 shifts, 8 hours each. The best coking coal in Crested Butte came from the Jokerville. The coal in the ovens was screen coal or slack, with the lump coal loaded on cars for market. 50 tons of coking coal a week came out of those ovens at the Jokerville mine. It is now 7:30 a.m., January 24th, 1884. The night shift has just gotten off of work. They get out at 7 o'clock a.m., 11 to 7. The morning shift had just gone in at 7 o'clock. And then a tremendous explosion rocked the Jokerville mine, heard all over town. The fan providing air for the mine was shattered. Buildings were on fire outside of the mine. Smoke was coming out of the mines. And the people of Crested Butte rushed to the Jokerville, hoping upon hope that maybe somebody would be alive to come out of there. 61 men were killed, every one of them Cousin Jacks. Scotland, Wales, Ireland, England. The names were Coughlin, Donegan, Maroney, O'Neill, Walsh, McDonald, and Murray. The last 2 photos, if I can get Nell to go back to the previous one, those 2 photos, and there you can see, this is all an artist's drawing from Harper's Weekly that appeared in the Harper's Weekly magazine in February of 1884. I had a guy there that drew what happened and then wrote a great article about it. Harper's Weekly, February 1884. And there you can see the explosion and the mine after the disaster. Now we go to the next one. And in the next photographs, all these bodies were brought in and placed in one of the buildings, and they had a name tag put on their chest as they were identified. All the men working in chambers 1 and 2 were dead because they were right where the explosion occurred, and they were badly mutilated. Others died because the fan providing ventilation was destroyed. One of the bosses of the mine, a guy named Johnny Cashion, Cashion, led 10 men, 1/3 of a mile from inside the mine, walking for 30 minutes, and they made it out. And a big cheer went up when they came out into the opening, and they false hope that other people might have survived. On the other hand, 17 men got to within 200 feet of safety, uninjured, when they ran out of air and died of asphyxiation. The Jokerville mining disaster was the worst mine disaster in Colorado history up to that time. Even today, it is the 3rd worst in Colorado history. The worst one was 121 killed in the Hastings mine outside of Trinidad on April the 27th, 1917. Now, this is not the burying of bodies of the Jokerville miners. This is what usually happened when a guy died in the wintertime. He is being taken out to a blockhouse, which was located at the Crested Butte Cemetery, and placed in the blockhouse. And then, when spring came and the ground thawed, he would be buried in a ceremony at the Crested Butte Cemetery. 46 miners were buried 5 days after the blast in a common grave on the northwest side of the Crested Butte Cemetery in 3 feet of snow and a driving blizzard. A coroner's report said, after 7 days of hearings, that the explosion had been in chamber 2, caused by gas coming into contact with naked light. Before the Jokerville explosion, a geologist named Arthur Lakes of Colorado School of Mines had visited the Jokerville and said in his report that this mine was very dangerous. He said the roof was poor and a ticking sound was heard constantly from the escape of gases in the coal. Lakes went on to say that as mining went deeper, coal gases would increase and a need for better ventilation would be needed. And he concluded with the comment, doubtless, the coal of this mine contains the greatest amount of dangerous gas in the state. The Colorado Coal and Iron Company chose the jury, and many who wanted to testify were not allowed to during the inquest. John Gallagher, a man who had worked in the Jokerville before, said that although the fans supplied more air than the law required, a lot of the air escaped up the main shaft before it could be distributed. There is no doubt that the Colorado Coal and Iron Company was guilty of gross negligence. And I'm going to give you about 5 or 6 reasons why. Number 1, the coroner, a man named William Snyder, was an employee of the Colorado Coal and Iron Company. Number 2, the foreman from Anthocyte, he's a guy who worked at Anthocyte now and helped remove dead men from the mine, condemned the Colorado Coal and Iron Company for negligence, but he wasn't called as a witness. Number 3, John Gibson, the foreman, had only been in the mine 6 times in 1 year because he considered it too dangerous. Number 4, Colorado law required that 2 entries of a mine had to be 300 feet apart, but in the Jokerville, they were only 60 feet apart. And number 5, James Richardson, the superintendent and the man responsible for checking for gas, had been fired for neglect of duty a year before by the CC&I and then rehired a few days before the explosion. So all of these men died in the mine, had been cheated on all of their coal that they mined, and worked under very dangerous conditions. The men who came in to get the dead bodies out came in from coal mines at Baldwin, up Ohio Creek, and Anthocyte, up the Slate. Out of 65 miners working in the mines at Baldwin, only 5 showed up for work. The other 60 guys got the South Park Railroad to Gunnison and then took the Rio Grande up to Crested Butte and helped take the people out. 12 men who missed the train hired a sleigh and came to Crested Butte by that means. The CC&I and the Denver Rio Grande Railroad weren't too anxious about bringing more miners in because they were afraid of the miners, were very angry because of the explosion. On January the 28th, 4 funerals took place. The Masons buried John Rutherford. The Oddfellows buried Dan McDonald, Jacob Lanks, and John Smith. On January 29th, 5 days after the explosion, 46 miners were buried in a common grave at the Crested Butte Cemetery. Funeral services began at City Hall in the afternoon. The Protestants took 30 minutes for a service, and then Father James Quinn of the Catholic Church took an hour before crowded City Hall with people standing outside to listen. At 3 p.m., the procession was formed in front of the Elk Mountain house. The order as they moved to the cemetery were, first, sleighs with coffins. Second, miners in charge of Foreman Gibson. Thirdly, officers in charge of Sheriff Doc Shores of Gunnison. Fourthly, friends and citizens. And then 5, Father Quinn and his altar boys. The newspaper account said, "It is very stormy here today, and the ceremonies have been carried out with great difficulty. The snow to the cemetery was 3 feet deep on the level, with no road broken. Despite this, most of the citizens of Crested Butte walked to the cemetery. Some of the remains were transferred to the depot to be shipped out east on rail. The last 2 bodies, Tom Roberts and John Thomas, were found on February the 2nd. All of the bodies have been placed in the blacksmith shop with a card attached to the breast of each man as they were identified. The Jokerville never reopened. It was allowed to fill up with water. Some of the best coking coal in the nation is still there. 1 year later, in 1885, a new opening was made 60 feet above the old vein, but it was still very dangerous because of gas. That mine was worked for 9 years and closed in 1895 because of too much gas and because the coal vein had narrowed to 8 feet. Later, the Crested Butte paper said this in honor of the men and where they worked, and I quote, "While rising sheer against the sky in all its matchless majesty, defiant of the ages sped, the butte uplifts its crested head. In granite armor strong and gray, a sentinel that still guards the way. Solemn and still it seems to be, looking into futurity." Most of the men who died at the Jokerville were single. 6 miners had families living in Crested Butte. Money, food, and clothing came for widows, including $1,000 for William Jackson Palmer of the Rio Grande. It was apportioned according to children per family, $65 each. 2 boys, Tommy Lyle and William Neath, were both 12 years old. They were killed. They worked as gatekeepers and they were killed by the blast. Morgan Neath, 17, was a driver, killed by the blast. Colonel M.L. DeCourcy, a prominent citizen of Crested Butte, was quoted in the Rocky Mountain News as saying, quote, The mine disaster was a great financial loss to merchants. Plus, it kept other miners from working while cleanup came. Temporary damper on the camp. He didn't give a damn about the miners. All he was worried about was how long the mine was going to be closed. The Colorado Coal and Iron Company telegraphed around the country to find families. One writer to the paper refers to the mine as the slaughter pen of the CC&I. Now, I was there to give a talk about 3 years ago when a memorial went up for the miners at the Jokerville mine. And the people of Crested Butte, you know, Betty Warren did a great job in doing it. And the speaker who came before me was Kay Flint, who was the daughter of a coal miner. And she started off her talk with, "I am a coal miner's daughter." And she gave a moving talk. And unfortunately, I had to follow. And I told Kay after that talk, I said, "Kay, that is the last time I'm ever going to follow you in any kind of a talk." And Kay and I have remained good friends to today. So that is it. We are not done with coal, but we will start with coal and anthocyte and fluorescent next week, and then get into the ethnic people of Crested Butte. So I will now, with everybody paying strict attention, give you the trivia question, which is in 2 parts. And before I do it, Nell is going to tell you how to answer.
All right. To answer Duane's trivia question, post it in the chat. If you're the first person to post on your end, it may not come through based on internet and the way Zoom works. Sometimes it shows up on our side in a different order than it does on your side. So the first person that we see on our end will be the winner of this week's trivia. If you have already won before, maybe hold off so somebody else can win.
All right, here's the question. Who was the town father of Crested Butte, and how many people died in the Jokerville explosion? 2-part question. We await the answer. Howard Smith and 100, no. Still don't have it.
We've got Lynn, who I think
61 is correct, but we haven't got the town. There we go. There we go. It's Howard Smith and 61. Who's number 1?
So that's Lynn, but she's won before.
All right.
The next
one. To the next one
is Emily Rutherford with Richardson and 61. That's not right.
No, that's not right. I think Annie Clausen I saw. Annie, put your answer up again. I think you were early.
She's got 61 died. She doesn't have Howard Smith.
She does not have Howard Smith. Okay.
The next one is...
There she goes. I think she did have it.
There's the next one is Catherine Schmidt with 61 and Howard.
Well, we'll give her that. Catherine? I think Annie Hunter Clausen had it though earlier, and we missed it. But I saw it come up early, so we're going to give it to her. She had Howard Smith in 61.
With Annie Clausen. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And we will get your address and everything, Annie. So with that, I'll take any questions that anybody has and attempt to answer. So the floor is open for questions.
We do have questions, starting off with Kristen asking what happened to the 7 miles of the underground path?
Still there. The opening was closed off and nobody was allowed to go in, obviously, because of the danger.
Okay. Next question is from Don. I have been told because the company owned much of the town, miners would establish saloons, mostly because that was a business that the company did not own, and it provided extra money to the miners that opened them. Is that true?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. John Rosich, a lot of other guys started these saloons. And when the guys came out of the mines, you know, you got a cold beer, you could gamble a little, and a lot of those immigrants could get a ticket for a ship passage They could, there are all kinds of things that the saloon keeper could help them with because he spoke the English language and maybe they didn't. That's true.
Okay. Next question from Deborah. Why was it only the Welsh mining in the Jokerville mine? Where were the Eastern Europeans?
Eastern Europeans had not yet come to Crested Butte. The first one actually came, the Kochever family, right after the Jokerville mine explosion, but most of them did not come until the 1890s. So you primarily had the cousin Jacks before that.
Okay. Let's see. Our next question. Could you tell us more about the grunk?
Well, the Gronk was simply part of the foundation for the peanut mine. And if you'll hold off on that, next week we're going to go into the peanut and the Pershing and Anthocyte, and I'll talk a little more about it then. But it was part of that foundation in the building of the peanut mine.
All right. Next from Eric, where is the Jokerville mine located today?
Well, you'd have to walk with me. Glow can show you exactly if you're on the tour. Just as you go out of Crested Butte and start up the hill and you go to the left, that's about where it was. And all I can say is if you get about, maybe 100 yards west of town on the left side of the road, that's where it was.
And to be clear, that's also on private property. So don't go wandering out there, but you can see it from Kebler Road. You can kind of see, you can tell where it was. Yeah. Let's see, next question. Where did the Masons come from that built the ovens?
Well, all of these guys were cousin Jacks, and obviously many of them had been stone masons over in Wales. So, they weren't just miners, but they had to do other things. So they were absolutely skilled in every trade in Wales. They're the best.
From Bobby Martin, what became of the shafts beneath the bench, Gibson Ridge?
What became of the
shafts beneath the bench?
The shacks?
Shafts, S-H-A-F-T-S.
Oh, the shaft, yeah. Well, as I told you, that when the mine shut down, that was closed. They filled in the opening and everything with everyone to keep people out of there. You couldn't have people wandering around a coal mine.
Also from Bobby, is Jack's cabin related to the cousin Jack reference?
No. Jack's cabin was named for Jack Howe, who was visited one time by a woman, and the newspaper account said when she came in, Jack went out the back door and wasn't seen again. It was his wife.
From Don, can you tell us what happened to the company houses after the mine shut down?
That is a good question, and I don't know. They were very prominent houses. My guess is that many of them were moved over to Gunnison, but I will try to find that out. The Bessemer Museum will have to tell me that. I don't know. It's a good question.
Some of those houses are still there, maybe not all of them, but if you go next to the Elk Mountain Lodge, you can see two of the larger houses that were renovated, and you can also see a couple more that still look very similar. Right. But as for all of them, I'm not sure.
Yeah, most of them were moved out somewhere, not in Crested Butte, because when the mine closed up and the railroad pulled out, everybody thought Crested Butte was going to become a ghost town.
So a couple people have asked this. Are there any remaining evidence of the coke ovens, and what happened to the coke ovens?
Well, yeah, you can see, when they were building, putting in the skating rink, they uncovered some of the ovens, and I think there's 2 or 3 of them that are still there that they kept. You bet.
And some people reuse those coke oven bricks in their gardens. We have some in our garden at the museum. I mean, anything you can reuse, right?
Yeah.
Joelle asks, why were the San Juans rich in ore? What ore?
Well, you'd have to ask a geologist why, but the San Juan mines, I'm talking primarily about Telluride, Uray, and Silverton. Lake City was right kind of on the edge. Lake City had better ore than the Gunnison country, but it didn't have the ore that the other three had. The other three were very, very fortunate because not only did they have a lot of high-grade silver, but when the silver panic hit in 1893, then they were able to turn to gold. So the answer to the question is, I don't know, but I will ask my geologist friend, Prather or Bartleson, and have that answer for you next week.
All right, from Dan, did the coal go beyond Pueblo? And if so, where did it go and for what purpose?
Yeah, the bituminous coal pretty much ended at the CF&I steel mills. The anthracite coal was shipped all the way out as far as Kansas City. Because that's heating coal.
Yep. Mark asks, several ski runs at Crested Butte are named after mines, right? Any
Absolutely.
other besides the Jokerville?
Yeah. Well, the Jokerville is one. You know, Keystone is another one that comes off the top of my head. And I'll think about that. You're right. There are a number of others. Yeah. I don't think we have any Pershing, Peanut, Robinson. I'm just going through. Oh, Floresta. I think there's a run called Floresta.
Mm-hmm. Jan asks, okay, this is a tough question, Jan, because there's two pronunciations to this name. When did the Krismanich or the Krismanich family come to CB?
Yeah, Krismanich. John Krismanich is a good friend of mine, and you know, he was born, can't remember if John was born here or there, but all those families, I don't know exactly when the Krismanich family, I can find out from John Jr., but I think the Krismanich family came in the late 1890s with a lot of the other Southeast Europeans. That's when many of them came. I'll find out.
And for anybody who ever does family research or anything like that, the museum has all kinds of family history records that we love to share.
Nell, I want you to get Catherine Schmidt, because I think she may have been one of the winners. I'm going to send her a book also.
Okay. All right. Next question is from Don. How could an average miner in a silver camp ever expect to get rich?
He couldn't. But you always had the hope that you would uncover a rich mine, that you would become another Horace Tabor, or you'd become another Winfield Stratton. And yeah, you're betting on the come. You know, if you don't play, you can't win, right? Most of those guys did not make a lot of money, but they loved what they did.
From Steve, are there any of the mining tunnels still existent?
Oh yeah, you know, all of the shafts, of course, in the coal mine, the big mine is still available, and a lot of the silver mines are available, but remember, they've all been shut because of the danger. But they're still there. You bet.
Yes, it's very dangerous to go hunting in mines. Don't recommend it. All right, Dave asks, I've been told that there was another store in town in addition to the company store, probably when the Eastern Europeans came. The owner carried olives and other items that the Slovenes and Croatians and Italians were used to. I guess it's
well, yeah, you know, if you look at an early map of Elk Avenue, there indeed were other stores. And, you know, like Tony Stefanik's, for instance, had the Tony store. And I can remember going in there, you want to buy some beef, Tony would have the stuff hanging up in the back and cut you a slab of beef that you wanted. Yeah, there are a number of other stores. And of course, you get a lot from the saloons too.
Lynn asks, did the mines operate during World War I and World War II?
Absolutely, because that's when coal was needed. They operated full bore during the wars.
All right. Let's see. Was polka music the music of choice with the miners?
Was the polka the music of choice?
Yeah.
You better believe it. Roll out the barrel. We'll have a barrel of fun. Pete Bender will talk more about that, but absolutely, they danced the polka, they danced the waltz, and the other dance was the schottisch, which I grew up with. 1, 2, 3, hop, 1, 2, 3, hop, 1 hop, 2 hop, 3 hop, 4 hop. We'll show you that one next March the 4th.
Next question. Didn't Hoyt Axton live in one of the company towns?
What was the name, Nell?
Hoyt, Hoyt, Axton, Axton.
Boy, I don't know that name. I know Axtell, but not Axton. Sorry.
From Linnell, just a nice comment. My grandfather, James Hunter Arnott, closed the big mine. My family says that all of the equipment was moved inside and then the entrance was blown up.
Ah, very good.
Nikki asked, was gold ever mined in Crested Butte anywhere?
Say it again.
Was gold ever mined in Crested Butte anywhere?
The answer is yes, but just placer. And remember, if you were around last week, I talked about the head of Washington Gulch at Elkton, where they took a lot of gold out of there. And they also mined on the Crystal River, then known as Rock Creek. And they panned out almost every stream. But as far as gold mining where you go underground, no. Now, there was a little gold in all the great silver camps, but not very much.
Our last question that I see is from Emily. Were miners exempt from the draft because of the need for coal?
No, they weren't. A lot of guys went to World War I and World War II, but it depended on your age. And they always seemingly had enough miners that were old enough to stay out of the draft.
All right. Any last questions coming in? Okay. Were the miners and townspeople mainly single, or were they married and had families?
At the time of the Jokerville, everyone was single except 6. Later on, almost everybody had families. Oh, thank you, Bill, for the information on Hoyt.
All right. As people type in their last comments and questions, I just want to say a huge thank you to our sponsors once again. Thank you to the Western Colorado University Alumni Relations. Thank you also to Bill Petros and Bluebird Realty. Thank you, Duane, for being here. We had 177 people on tonight. So
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Hit the chat board, everybody. I'm always interested to see who you are.
Oh, we did get another question.
Doug, good to have you on board again, buddy.
What actually made Crested Butte a profitable town?
What made it a profitable town? Well, very early, silver, jumping off point for the Elk Mountains. Coal made Crested Butte. Crested Butte was coal. Now, made a lot of money for the CF&I. You know, the miners made some, but not a lot. And then, of course, when the age of snow came, you're living in it. Eflin and Rice, 1961. Thank you, Megan. Anybody else from around the nation? I know we got, hey, Shirley, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Jane. You bet, Janetta. Yeah, a lot of people coming on. Yeah, great to have everybody. Hopefully I'll see you all aboard next week.
And don't forget, we are recording them. You can find them at CrestedButteMuseum.com, or you can go to YouTube and just search Crested Butte Museum, and you'll also find it there.
Thank you, Lynn. All right, folks. Vandenbusche over and out. See you next Thursday.
Bye, Duane.
You bet. Bye.